do you see in the descriptions as we look at these emails, and I think cases can be made that there was a certain a feeling of intimidation at Bank of America at the same time that Bank of America probably used the situation to try to leverage their best gain. Do you see how you got involved here as something extraordinary in the sense of you felt the system was collapsing, or is this going to be a repetitive pattern of the Fed? Obviously, we
could the gentleman talk directly into the microphone? We're having difficulty hearing you.
That several other times in whether it be the Asian flu or various mini crises, that had you been Fed chairman taken this aggressive a role?
The past 2 years has been the worst financial crisis since the 1930s. It has threatened the stability of the global financial system and the global economy. Extraordinary actions have had to be taken. We've learned a great deal from them. And as I said in my testimony, I hope the Congress will take actions to ensure that the system will remain stable and that no such actions will be needed in the future. I very, very much regret being involved in them, but I saw no alternative at the time.
And how do you see yourself extricating at this point, given the fact that you've been fairly politicalized? Your Treasury is directly political. You have quasi-political entities that you're working with. Now directly in TARP and TARF and all the different programs, we have equity stake in companies. How do you get yourself untwined from this so you're not totally politicalized?
Well, we work closely with the Treasury to deal with the crisis. As the crisis ends, we will withdraw all of our non-standard programs. We saw just a couple weeks ago that 10 banks repaid their TARP money, and as we go forward, we'll expect to see more withdrawal of programs and support as the economy normalizes and the financial system normalizes.
Do you see yourself, because in this particular case, part of the problem is that Bank of America moved into the non-bank sector with Merrill Lynch, and that about 40% of our lending, and as you know, one of my challenges has been recreational vehicles and autos and how we get money into floor plans and how to do that type of thing. Most of that was the non-bank sector. How do you see the Fed in the future dealing with this non-bank sector, which isn't normally where you would be?
Well, there are a number of suggestions in the administration's reform plan and other reform plans for dealing with that. Certainly, the extraordinary steps we've taken, for example, to revitalize the asset-backed securities market. We're seeing a lot of progress there, by the way. As that market revitalizes, the financial system normalizes, we will certainly withdraw and not be involved in that any further.
And do you see yourself or see the Fed in the future being, I mean, we've gone back and forth here. Sometimes we want an independent Fed. Sometimes we say, well, you're all the government. You ought to be sitting down at one table and working out this strategy. Where do you see Fed going based on this experience and getting increasing? I mean, I don't see in the short term you getting less politicalized because you're in the middle of everything now and everybody's asking you to do this, do that.
In a financial crisis, I think the American people expect their government to work collectively and cooperatively to try to solve the problem. We've worked closely with both the former Treasury and the current Treasury, as well with other agencies, and that's relevant to the crisis. We have maintained very strong independence on monetary policy. That's critical going forward. And we expect, of course, as the financial crisis eases, to stand down on the financial crisis-related policies.
And agreeing that we were in deep trouble last fall, how would you, because one of your expertise is deflation, and sometimes when it's your expertise, you have a tendency to anticipate. In this case, I think we've proven we've had deflation, but you in your career have projected it was going to happen before, and it didn't. How would you have a guideline that says, oh, we're going to have these extraordinary interventions? How did you determine that this was the greatest thing and the greatest crisis since the Great Depression when it wasn't there yet?
Well, it was my judgment based on history, lots of research and reading and thinking and experience, that the collapse of major financial firms can be very detrimental to the economy, and if there was any doubt about that, the failure of Lehman Brothers and the near failure of AIG should put that to rest. I think it's critically important as we go forward that we find measures to avoid such a situation in the future, and I'd very much like, again, not to be involved in such activities.
And you've outlined the challenge because some feel that some failures would have cleansed the system. Some believe that they would have brought down the whole thing. And in fact, this debate has occurred probably at least 5 times in the last 15 years as to whether we were at the precipice. And the question is that if it's going to lead to this much intervention, every time there's extraordinary discretion in a few individuals to say this is that. I mean, I'm not disagreeing on this one. I voted every single time with great political duress for each of the financial interventions. But the process here concerns me, and the more data we get, the more it concerns me.
Again, if we have a resolution regime that will be more appropriate for resolving these firms in a crisis, we can avoid this problem in the future.
Gentleman's time has expired. And now yield 5 minutes to the gentlewoman